Hi there. Welcome to today's breakout session. My name is Christian McKelvie and I'm the head of marketplace for catch.com.au. Today's session will cover just some of the key learnings we observed over the last few months in the Australian market that were driven by the onset of COVID-19, the impact that had on both consumers and their buying behaviour. In terms of some of the discussion points we'll cover, I'll give a brief introduction about myself, about Catch, what we do, and our presence in the Australian market that allowed us to gain some of these insights. I'll cover some of those observations we had on consumer values, on their buying behaviour, and also their expectations, and also deep dive a little bit into how that change in consumer behaviour shaped our category growth, particularly in some categories that traditionally weren't a strong performer for us prior to COVID, but evolved in time as consumer needs and values evolved. And then finally, I'll cover just some of our tips and our beliefs that retailers need heading into the months ahead based off these learnings and understandings. While this is a pre-recorded session, I'm available live to answer any questions you might have. So feel free to chat them away during the session. If there's any points you want me to elaborate on or have any follow-up questions, or if there isn't anything that's covered that you may want to pick my brain on, feel free to ask and chat those there. So a bit about us and myself. So catch.com.au is one of Australia's largest online marketplaces. My role there, as mentioned, is head of marketplace. So I look after the day-to-day functions and the general strategic direction for the team and that particular business unit. I've been with Catch now for almost over 3 years. Originally, when I joined, I was on the sales team and then eventually took over the day-to-day management of the team. Prior to that, I had a very extensive and eclectic career in retail in general, majority of that in the e-commerce space, and have done a few different disciplines from buying to digital marketing to running a platform now in this role. So that's myself. Catch. So Catch originally started over 13 years ago, and originally we were a daily deals site. So we'd focus on closeout clearance stock, bring it in units by the thousand, and then focus on a great deal. Once it was sold out for the day, that was it. We'd move on to the next deal for the next day. That proved to be incredibly successful, and we evolved that model in time to encompass almost all retail categories you could think of, and we pretty much evolved to become from that into one of Australia's largest e-commerce players. Per the timeline, by June 2017, we decided to explore and evolve into that marketplace model. And the primary reason for that was, as mentioned, our buying model and our e-commerce model was then based off buying end-of-line closeout clearance stock from retailers and distributors. And we decided to meet customer demand for more long-tail products, for more new range. We thought the marketplace was the quickest way to scale to meet that demand. So we opened in June 2017, and we've had an incredible year-on-year growth under that model. For us, some of the key point of differences that led to that marketplace success was adopting a similar strategy to that of Amazon, with focusing more on the product and on single product listings that had multiple offers from different sellers, but also really doubling down on customer experience, customer care, and only allowing our marketplace to be open to sellers through an application only. We have a very extensive range of Australian and international retailers on our platform, and because of that, and because of our brand proposition as well as presence in the Australian market, we've achieved some incredible year-on-year growth, as mentioned, and that was one of the key reasons why we were acquired by Wesfarmers in August 2019. For those of you unaware, Wesfarmers is one of the largest Australian retail groups, and its network encompasses several massive retailers, primarily in the physical retail space, and that includes Kmart, Target, and Bunnings. And it was a privilege to be welcomed and part of that network of established Australian retailers. So Catch at a glance. So as mentioned, what we do is think of us as an Australian massive marketplace that has almost the same experience as a department store. We aim to have everything you could possibly want and need, and our vision is to eventually become the place where Australians start their shopping journey. Most of the numbers I'll run you through quickly now to give you an idea of how much we encompass of the Australian consumer. It is primarily focused on our marketplace component. So I think just to touch off with, in terms of our site presence and reach, we get over 15 million monthly site visitors, and that's dramatically increased during the COVID period, with us capturing almost over 100,000 new customers monthly in 2020 to date. From those visitors, we have an active customer database of over 2.3 million. Now, what we mean by active is that they've at least made a purchase of us once within a 12-month window. In terms of also understanding, I guess, our loyalty and our popularity in the Australian market, over 185,000 of those active customers are Club Catch members. What our Club Catch service is a paid subscription service for customers, in which they get free shipping on any purchases over $45 on site, as well as a range of a whole other list of benefits that they get. The Club Catch customers are our most loyal of customers. Their purchasing frequency is quite significant, and they're really strong brand advocates for Catch. In terms of our product reach and range, thanks to the marketplace model, we have over 2 million live products live at any time, and that increases substantially day by day. We sell almost one item every 5.5 seconds. And the bulk of those orders come through our mobile service and our Catch app that we launched a few years ago. In terms of our marketplace size, we have over 1,500 third-party sellers live at any time. We fully support them as part of that marketplace model through ongoing support and managed onboarding services. The more successful of our sellers find it to be a great extension and a great sales channel to leverage that provides them a different and diverse customer base, particularly in Australia. So just a bit of context for that spiel. Part of it is the cheeky pitch, but the other part of it is just to kind of communicate our brand value proposition, what we offer and what we encompass in the Australian market, just to give credence to some of the discussion points I'll cover now, particularly on consumer behaviour. Our extensive reach and the fact that our customer base, while primarily female, is also a shopper that likes to explore, buy across different categories, means we were able to get a very privileged and unique look into consumer trends by not being pigeonholed into a particular category. And some of these I'll share and discuss now. So to begin with, let's have a look at some of the change in buying habits we observed. Now, some of these, again, were observed more in the period between April to June. Some of these continue to be relevant today. As of now, and a lot of these are still continuing to evolve and change based off factors beyond consumers' control. Some of these might be localized to the Australian market, and some of these are quite common to other regions around the globe. So to begin with, I think the biggest impact to the Australian consumer and their buying habits was the forced adoption of online shopping. So in Australia, online shopping was still gradually evolving, as primarily fueled by Amazon entering the market, which prompted more retailers to embrace online sales channels and also double down on their online strategy. And players like ourselves, emerging marketplaces that were Australian born and bred, also added more competitive fuel to the fire that led to stronger development in the e-commerce space. And from that, we got more buyers, shoppers online. So while that was increasing already prior to COVID at a rapid but steady rate, it still was quite behind other, I guess, e-commerce buying behaviors around the rest of the globe. COVID changed that. So like other countries, we had a forced lockdown and shutdown of a lot of retail channels and a lot of services in restaurant space and hospitality, which forced consumers to have to buy online. And that brought a series of different challenges and different insights, some of them which I'll cover shortly. But that forced adoption was primarily started in March, but then we had a second wind in Victoria just over 7 weeks ago, in which it was much more extensive and restricting on retail trade, which led to a second wave of forced online buying behaviour. The impact of that is that Victoria is one of the largest states and represents one of the biggest population densities for the Australian market. So that had quite a substantial impact. So this forced adoption was one of the biggest changes in buying habits. It forced consumers to consider online as their only source of acquiring retail goods, but particularly retail goods that normally didn't have quite a strong presence or was the first point of call for Australian consumers. And that included things like groceries, everyday essentials, but particular impulse buys, low value purchases that normally consumers would be happy and would be motivated to go up to the physical stores to purchase. So yes, that leads to the next point: where, how, and when consumers shopped online. So one of the biggest changes we noticed in terms of its impact on e-commerce was that traditionally, like other retailers, we saw that consumers would buy during times of day that they were able to stop, browse, and not be distracted by the rat race, so to speak. So normally we would have strong peaks outside of work hours or during breaks. So early morning, during the consumer commute to work, lunch breaks, and then our biggest spike was in the evening after work. In light of COVID changing a lot of work conditions, with people potentially facing restricted work hours or being forced to work from home, we found that eventually we, rather than having these spikes, we had a consistently strong buying pattern throughout the entire day. So if anything, nighttime eased off a little bit, and that was then spread out more evenly throughout daytime hours. Mobile continued to evolve quite rapidly, particularly as people were no longer being able to access desktop for work reasons, or were quickly accommodating to working from home changes, and mobile continues to still be a strong driver for us. And also how consumers were shopping. So we noticed more consumers browsing bigger cart sizes and an increased frequency as to when they would come back for a repeat purchase. Finally, the other massive change we noted was the surge in long-tail product purchases. This was attributed to two factors. One was the lockdown restrictions. So as specialty retailers were forced to ease up on trading hours, as restrictions came into what retailers could open, that led to a surge of consumers having to explore and get these products online. So examples of this is obviously strong growth in groceries and essential purchases, but then we saw that in other categories like home renovations, home decor, a massive spike in furniture, but also in other categories like alcohol and liquor, as consumers adjusted to a homebody mindset during COVID. We also noticed that this surge continued, but in categories we couldn't predict. So a good example of that, and some of these I'll cover a little bit more later, is that as consumers were forced to kind of look at the same wall, spend time around the home, then demand soared into categories like gardening, home DIY, and also in home decor, as consumers wanted to freshen up the environment that they were forced to reside in. At the same time, the change in lifestyle and based off the restrictions also led to drop in categories like travel goods and luggage. There was a drop in fashion apparel, particularly for workwear, for more dressing up attire. But that was then complemented by a surge in casual wear and comfort wear. But again, I'll cover more of that later in this session. So the other impact of buying habits was people buying more at once. Panic buying hit Australia as it did in other regions around the globe, and it was fueled by the uncertainty of the environment. As we got into a system and a pattern of each day more restrictions were put in place, that surged customers wanting to buy in bulk. And it was further fueled by media outlets reporting on this pattern, and we noticed that bleed into the online space. Some of it was quite obvious in terms of people trying to buy a hand sanitizer and face mask when they were in high demand, but in time, as other categories surged, we noticed that panic buying mentality would carry across, particularly in toys and games. We noticed people buying in bulk of puzzles, of construction products like Lego, out of that fear that stock wouldn't be available or would sell out quite quickly. So the other biggest change in buying habits, and one we had to adjust to meet with quite quickly, was expectations being quite eclectic and varied. And that was primarily due to so many new first-time online shoppers purchasing online. While ourselves, like other retailers, were used to a certain communication method, a certain UX, and a certain expectation set from existing online shoppers, the expectation would vary substantially across these. For season shoppers, for example, their expectations of delivery time was much more in line with how it was pre-COVID. But for a lot of these first-time buyers, this was the first time they were experiencing it, and the expectations varied. And also there was a change in expectations based off COVID-19. So we noticed an easing up on or an understanding towards delivery restrictions, particularly as our logistics carriers were hit by changing and by restrictions, particularly changes to staffing capacity and work hours, and also evolving to conditions to meet quarantine and safety standards and to reduce infection. But at the same time, there was an expectations for retailers to ramp up their service delivery and their customer service to meet this increasing consumer, as well as particularly communicating key product features on listings, as more consumers were forced to only have to buy online. The biggest change to that was obviously that the customers could no longer go into stores to inspect the product themselves and then buy online. They need that information front and center at the time of purchase. And finally, the social conditions changing buying habits. So as more restrictions came in place, as more limitations came in place, that changed how the frequency people buy it, but also what they were buying in terms of also their add-on purchases and long-tail product extensions. So a good example of this is that coffee and party supplies. So as consumers could no longer pop up to their local cafes to buy a coffee, or it's restricted down to takeaway, or because they couldn't, they no longer go on their commute, there's a surge in coffee machines and kitchenware to make your own perfect brew. At the same time, as people couldn't go to function centres, go to restaurants, bars, cafes, we saw that there was a surge in home decor, particularly for party supplies, as people attempted to recreate a party atmosphere in their own home for regular seasonal events like Easter and birthdays. The change in values is probably the most interesting and shaped changing consumer behavior and patterns in COVID. The biggest one we saw was trust being a key value in the buying process for consumers. And by trust, I mean that again, as consumers were forced to buy online, where they bought, trust was the key factor, particularly for a range of goods that normally they would go to established retailers to buy from. So say groceries, consumables, perishables, health products. Consumers wanted to put more credibility in social proofing, like product reviews, seller reviews, feedback on a particular brand or business, and preferred to buy off channels they trusted and knew could deliver a great customer experience, a good pre-purchase experience, a good delivery experience, and a great post-purchase experience. And so consumers would flock more to those retailers, even if it wasn't the most competitive pricing, because they put more precedence and continue to put more importance in that trust. That trust eventually then flew on to also wanting to support local businesses. As the onset of the virus hit, and as more retailers struggled, particularly the smaller local businesses, there was an increased importance in supporting local retailers or Australian bodies and manufacturers. And this was further fueled by the fact that as supply lines dried up from an international segment, that retailers wanted to and were forced to resort to local manufacturers. And that's what a trend that continues to embrace. And a lot of retailers like ourselves, a lot of marketplaces like ourselves, doubled down by really calling out to consumers the locally made goods and businesses. The other change was also in terms of what consumers put value on. So we noticed a decline in, say, high-ticket branded products, and was more of a focus on everyday essentials, but also on the quality and the value. As the COVID restrictions changed or created a significant divide, particularly with employment. Some people were very lucky and were in industries that either have maintained during COVID or experienced strong growth, but others were unfortunately and sadly not as lucky. And so this created quite a substantial shift. For those that were in a privileged position, we noticed that there was an increase in discretionary purchases, but particularly for things to keep occupied at home or to change their living environment. But there was still a focus on quality and everyday value. Everyone was focused on the essentials. The other point from that is that also there was a more consideration put into the purchase, either from a financial factor or customers were just particularly concerned, especially with health products, and that were focused on the ingredients, on the description pre-purchase, and on the quality of the goods when they arrived. And this led to an increased concern over product compliance and safety, particularly for products that were aimed at reducing the spread of coronavirus and for maintaining safety of friends and family. The product compliance is an interesting one, particularly we saw that with face masks, both in terms of more consumers being quite considered in how they were packaged and shipped. We had a lot of consumers concerned if it was in non-sturdy packaging, for example, if it was package damages, over the hygiene quality, and if the protective nature of the mask might have been compromised. At the same time, as these compliance concerns were raised, as people more vocal about poor performing sellers or products that may not have met compliance and safety standards and expectations, this also led to an increase from safety and compliance bodies in Australia to focus on these products and really crack down on products that weren't meeting mandatory standards. And finally, it was a change in consumer attitudes towards shipping and delivery, and this was possibly the biggest one. So delivery costs, attitudes towards that change. Consumers were obviously conscious of pricing of delivery, but we saw that they were happier to pay a slightly higher cost if it guaranteed more security and transparency on that delivery method, usually through the form of tracking numbers, but also tracking updates and the speed of delivery. But obviously, as changes happened to the market, where delivery was unfortunately not really as much of an option, or pricing did vary due to restrictions and fulfillment and logistics, there was a more understanding towards a slight reduction in competitive shipping rates. Tracking communication became key. This was primarily fueled by the fact that the majority of the logistics partners here had to resort to the removal of signature on delivery or direct collection from household or consumers. So majority of carriers had to resort to just leaving the package on the doorstep in a safe place. And so this put a precedence on customers to make sure that, they wanted clear communication. They wanted to be updated, have clarity on the date of arrival, ideally the time, so that they can ensure someone would be there to collect the package or grab it from the doorstep as soon as possible to reduce lost items. This communication was also key, as well as, as the postal network increased dramatically. It also helped mitigate customer concerns of late deliveries, of lost orders, and that normal consideration for communication and tracking became more of an expectation from a lot of customers. From that, again, that was that focus on last mile delivery. Customers had to reconsider were limited to where they could have their orders shipped. So that reduced normal traditional safety drop-off points, such as click and collect services or office environments. And so again, communication that last mile became and continues to be quite a strong factor and part of that buyer's decision-making factor. The other aspect of shipping and delivery was, again, that there was more concern placed on international delivery and also on the carrier. Consumers wanted to know the carrier, particularly for international deliveries, because the level of service and expectation varied quite substantially. So these were some of the insights we noticed on consumer behaviour. Conscious of time, I'm happy to elaborate on these points. As mentioned, just chatting any questions in the comment section. So, as mentioned, I thought another way of exploring kind of the shape of consumer trends and where they were choosing to invest their money was looking at how we evolved with our category selection during COVID. So prior to COVID, as you can see on this chart here are our top performing categories. So we were progressing quite strong in certain categories based off the back of the bushfire season in Australia at the time. So prior to COVID, we had the horrible bushfires that occurred between December to Feb, and that saw an unusual out of season growth in certain categories like health and beauty. So prior to COVID, we were already seeing a surge in face masks due to the smoke and air pollution that was occurring, and also in products and devices like air purifiers and filters. But otherwise, most of our category strengths were were in line with what we've seen previously year on year, but also in terms of also the season. So growth, for example, groceries and liquor was fueled in that kind of post-Christmas season. Health and beauty was fueled by, as I mentioned, products to deal with the air pollution caused by the bushfires. But sports and outdoors, it was the Australian summer, so that was naturally one we saw grow quite substantially around January and prior to COVID. Likewise, with garden tools and hardware for summer season. So there was nothing here that was too out of the ordinary. However, when we went into the quarter that was the height of COVID and its impact, you can really see the impact that it had in comparison to that Q3 figure. So groceries and liquor skyrocketed substantially. And again, that was because of people having to flock to us for essential everyday goods. We noticed some interesting trends with liquor category, particularly whenever there was a paranoia or fear that bottle shops and liquor stores would be the next one to close down the lockdown. We'd see a surge online. And it was a real testament to retailers that were already embracing omnichannel mentality and online presence, that the early adopters that were on our marketplace to sell online for beer, wine, and spirits really were lucky to ride the early onset of that buying trend. Again, health and beauty, substantially fueled by things like hand sanitizers and face masks. For sports and outdoors, we really saw that fueled by home gyms and equipment. And as I mentioned, that's a good example of consumer trends changing to adapt to services closed down. Gyms were one of the recreational services shut, a lot of parks, a lot of activities like yoga, golf, etc. And home gyms increased initially on the onset based off that. But what was interesting as trainers evolved to the market, started doing more online streaming, then we saw a surge in the accessories and products to complement those online classes, like yoga bands, for example. Garden tools and hardware, that was fueled by the trend of consumers being at home. It was interesting to see such a massive spike for us at this time, because that was ultimately the autumn-winter season. Traditionally we normally see a spike in that at this time of year, in spring and in summer. But we saw a surge there, particularly for people that decided to use the time at home to update their garden, to add more plants and scenery to improve their view, so to speak. But also we saw a surge in indoor plants. Home office and media, another one fueled by consumption of things like books, video games, and even still physical media. While there was a big trend towards people embracing online services to both keep the kids occupied, but to also pass the mundane nature of being stuck at home. Again, no one could go to the cinemas during that time. We saw those categories skyrocket substantially. Furniture, again, that mentality of people being homebodied, deciding, well, now I'm spending more time at home. They're noticing that outdated couch. They're noticing how uncomfortable their recliner is, and opted to renovate and make the most out of it indoors by freshening up their space. And that was a similar mentality replicated in the home decor and living space. Toys, kids, and baby. More kids were forced to be pulled out of school and to study from home, or more parents were, and daycares were closed. So naturally there was a spike in products to keep children entertained while they were locked at home. I think just to kind of wrap up the discoveries here, as you can see on the chart, there was a flock to recreational and entertainment goods. But the interesting thing was how these evolved in time as more services were restricted, but as the lockdown went on, increased further and was extended. So tips for the month ahead. So based off kind of the discussion points we've had now, this is our advice we give sellers and pass on to you today. As mentioned, one of the key insights I give retailers to adapt to the Australian market is to look for product gaps you have on your own site, but are particularly ones in the market, and leverage that to your advantage. We saw a lot of retailers jump on trends that were quite obvious, like trying to get in lots of face masks, trying to get in lots of hand sanitizers. That led to eventually the market being saturated with those. And that's the last thing any retailer wants, is to be holding too much inventory and having to clear it out. Product gaps was one we encourage, but also consider product gaps that don't exist in the online space and that might be at higher risk of consumers being forced to adapt there. As mentioned, there's always an opportunity based off restrictions. For example, if beauty salons and hairdressers close, then we observed a spike in personal care products, and that's a consideration to make as a retailer. Take the time to do the research on those new categories, particularly for the Australian market, and if you're looking at extending into that market there, then consider looking into consumer law requirements in terms of product expectations. This is one we noted, particularly for international sellers, they were quite stunned by, because we have some of the highest compliance standards, and some of the products they thought they could bring to the Australian market based off demand, again, health and beauty products, we ultimately couldn't be listed or in violation of some of our consumer laws and mandatory standards. Data, a bit of a no-brainer. Leverage that to your advantage. We really doubled down on improving our data visualization tools and reporting because of the erratic nature of the trends. Some trends were easily predictable. Groceries, everyday essentials. Others took us by surprise. For example, an onset of everyone having to work from home was we saw a big spike in stationery supplies and home office equipment, as consumers, once they decided to start working from home, wanted to make it as comfortable and as efficient as possible so they could continue to work. Data helps you get ahead of that trend. Optimize and maintain listings and stock on hand levels. The As I mentioned, the biggest expectation now for customers is they're really considering their purchases. They really want to avoid the pain points of having to go through a lengthy return process, particularly as shipping carriers still try to meet the demand and the strain on fulfillment networks. So they really want to make sure they've got all the information they need to reduce change of mind or any other kind of return situations. Optimizing listing will be a really key success in both delivering a great customer experience, but also to reduce those post-purchase issues. And keep stock of hand levels as accurate as possible. This time more than ever, a lot of retailers we saw stung, and a lot of customer service issues we saw were simply retailers were still using slower manual methods to keep stock up to date. And the problem was that due to sudden spikes, due to unpredictable demand, and due to also a drop in resources of some retailers, that listings were selling out quite quickly, and there was a lot of disappointed, upset customers. And that's the next point. Focus on really delivering great value and customer experiences. For those of you looking to enter the Australian market, or you're looking to develop your presence there, as I said, there's a great opportunity where there's so many customers that need to buy online. And while there's probably an end point to that, where as particularly now as certain states can open up more retail stores, and as customers go back to buying in retail, the key to really leveraging this opportunity is to deliver great experiences so you're in a position that customers want to continue buying online even once physical retail opens back up. Monitor local news daily. By local, I mean state-based news, but also Australian-based news. The reason why I suggest that is because, again, you can keep ahead of any trading restrictions that might hinder your own operation. But again, it's a great insight to understanding consumer expectations, fulfillment delays, the broader market, but also new opportunities. Some of the success we saw ourselves and from sellers was staying ahead of the trend in consumer demands by noting trends, like when the news would announce that, again, beauty and hairdressing salons were closed down, really doubled down on promotional efforts on ensuring we had a great range for health and beauty, particularly in personal care. Maintain constant communication with your supply lines and fulfillment partners. At this rate, anything can drop substantially. Australia is quite a diverse, very spread out continent, and the logistics networks is quite different to what you might see established in, say, Europe or the US or Asia. So it's important to maintain that communication with each different stakeholder along your supply lines and fulfillment chains, because delays can occur at any time. And also communication, generally customers aren't in the loop on that. So for example, we took initiative in really communicating carrier delay messages we were getting from our carriers to consumers ourselves, and we took on that ownership, because unfortunately they weren't or didn't know where to find that information from the carriers themselves, and we were the ones that were held accountable. And likewise, again, that ties into that stock on hand level. Emerging situations are jumping out every moment at the moment, particularly in Australia, for example. There's now particularly dock workers on strike, which has really slowed down container shipping and inventory resupplies. And being on top of that is critical to manage your own operations. I think finally, this is the key takeaway. Right now, be adaptable. We're all still learning new insights. The insights we learned a couple of months ago have changed again. And adaptability is really key. And some of the retailers you've probably observed yourself that have really driven success and have continued to survive in this environment are the ones that are adaptable, they're flexible, they're open to new ideas, and they're also agile. They're quick to embrace the new initiatives and the new trends. Be responsive. That's both to the market, to consumer demands, but to consumers themselves. There's a very strong amount of empathy with Australian consumers, where they get that this is unprecedented times and there's a lot of challenges no one's prepared to face. And they're tolerable as long as they're kept in the loop and you communicate to them. Communicate to them delays, communicate out of stock timely, and as soon as you discover them, because you'll find that there's more time, costs, and effort involved if you delay that communication and damage that experience for customers. And that leads to the final part. Again, be honest. Customers understand that delay is happening, that there are things beyond your control. If something sells out, just be transparent. Just say, look, I don't know the restock date. I don't know why I have more stock in, and let consumers make that choice. where we saw retailers got a lot wrong, and where we saw a shift more to a protective focus on trust and hesitancy in buying from select online retailers, particularly new ones in the market, was that that degree of transparency and honesty wasn't there. And it's a really key success factor right now, particularly for anyone wanting to enter the Australian market. So that summarizes my my presentation for today. There's obviously a lot that can be covered, and we're always happy to offer help and assistance and any insights you might have. Again, feel free to chat any to me now. I'll answer as many as I can that you might have from this session. Otherwise, you're welcome to follow up via these 2 contact points. If you're a new seller, you are welcome to apply to sell on Catch. As established players in the Australian space, we are more than equipped to help you enter the Australian market, or to provide another channel for you to penetrate into the Australian consumers. You can apply via that link there on the screen, or you're welcome to send us an email if you've got any questions or if you want to learn more, which is bdms@catch.com.au. If you happen to be an existing seller that's tuned in to listen today, always happy to share more insights, particularly relevant to your store and your success factors on there. You can email sellersupport@catch.com.au for more help on that, or you can lodge a ticket via our partner portal if you do have any questions as a follow-up to this session, or just on your own general store performance. Again, thank you so much, and hopefully there's been a few tips and insights here today to really help you on your journey with selling into the Australian market. Thank you very much.